So, bit of introduction then, sort of who am I? So, yeah, some of you know me, some of you don't, some of you might have read some of the stuff that I've done, some of you may have no idea who I am. It's at this point I realise I should have bought a clicker, so I'm just get somebody to nudge a button. It's kind of what I normally look like out on the hill. Full face harness, big race harness, swanky looking skinny glider. I've flown basically the hottest thing I can get my hands on forever. I started in the early days of paragliding, so in the late 80s, early 90s. I grew up watching my dad fly hang gliders. And as Robin says, my day job is actually in the back of a bus, treating the people that are hurt and sick. To be fair, I tend to go to more sick people than hurt people, on balance when I work in the ambulance. But currently I'm cycle response. I'm on secondment, so I have push bike with all the kit in the back, in the panniers. So I spend my days and my evenings in the West End of London, and again dealing with the hurt and the sick. But we've got a lot of people in a very small area, and we can get around very quickly on the bike. You can get from King's Cross station to Charing Cross station faster on a bike than you can by using the tube or a car. So it makes a lot of sense in central London. So about half my life is at work and on shift, and about half my life is off. And when I'm off, about a quarter of that is with the kids, and about a quarter of that is time for me to go play. So that's kind of what I do on the days off. I go flying at any and every available opportunity. So I'll often fly in conditions that are a little bit moody and a little bit weird. But that's just because if I don't fly, I might not get to fly for 3 weeks because of how the rotor is. It's a bit weird. So going back to the early days, this is me, Wales, 89, possibly 1990. And then that's my first wing, the purple one. It was a Harley Free Spirit, ripped off from the Fallow athlete. I learned to fly hang gliders at the same time, so I've got experience of both. But paragliding was the thing that really did it for me. The hang glider is relying on weight shift. I don't have a lot of weight to shift, so I always felt sort of out of control. Whereas on a paraglider, I'd waft up when no one else could soar, and I'd get blown up into the clouds, and it always made me look super talented. So paragliding is where I kind of hung the hat, but every so often I still get the odd sort of hangy pang when you see the Atoses go out. But I've been around the sport a little while. Most of my jollies nowadays are out sort of in Europe. I'll go out to Austria or Italy or France. I was at the British Open in Grand Banan last summer, and I'll be at the British Open again in Algiers this year. But as Robin alluded to, I work for the comms panel, so I'm overviewing safety at events. So if anyone messes up, it's me that they've got to explain it to, purely so that we can roll the lessons forward and stop people getting hurt and broken. And that's kind of my main motivation. I've done stuff for clubs over the years, mostly for the Dover and Folkestone Club. I've been a coach for a couple of years, been senior coach for the club for a couple of years, and then took on the role of safety officer. And while I was doing safety officer, I set up a network of safety officers around the UK. Because I'm living and based in London, sometimes I go to Dover, sometimes I go to Sussex, sometimes I go to Dunstable, sometimes I go to Thames Valley. But all of the sites, they're all small, shallow, covered in trees, and they all have the same kind of accidents. So we set up this network of pool learning. We have the incident reports going to like the BHPA, but the sort of people who stack it in the peaks or the lakes, they're going to have a different kind of accident to the kind of accidents that we'll have down here. And this is when we really sort of started to look at, what are the common factors of accidents. Not to shy away from it, but I've also had one of my own. I've had 2 reserve throws, but I want to try and avoid it because I've got these guys to go home to. And it hitting the ground really hurts. Like, if you've not done it yet, you'll know someone who has. Yeah, like there isn't a person out there who won't say that it's the most terrifying and awful experience when it all unravels. And that's really what we want to sort of kind of try and avoid. But yeah, so yeah, hopefully not too much sort of doom and gloom, hopefully not too much sort of squeamish enough. But part 1, we were going to talk about hazardous attitudes and staying safe. As Robin was saying, I wrote an article for XC Mag probably about 18 months ago now. You have a nice chat with Hugh, you might be able to buy back issues. I think it's 2, 3, 4, but I'd have to double check. But in that, there are 5 hazardous attitudes that have been identified in a survey as a leading cause, as a run-up to having a mishap. Because a mishap's never one thing; it's a series of steps. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then we did it in a rush, and then we made a mistake, and then we hit the ground. Or this happened, this happened, this happened, and we ignored the signs, and then we hit the ground. There's always a sequence of events. But in that sequence, there was a study done in North America that identified 5 common hazardous attitudes in the build-up to accidents. So we'll talk about those in part 1, and then we'll also talk about staying safe. And I like things in 5. It's easy to remember. You've got 5 things to talk about. So I've spit out 5 things for sort of kind of staying safe. And a lot of the stuff that I write on the comps panel website, that's again done in like a theme of 5. So it's, when you're trying to improve at comps, here's 5 things to think about. When you're flying in the gaggle, here's 5 things to think about. So that thing of 5 tends to work kind of quite well. I feel that. Okay. Then we'll have an intermission and a break for more beer. And then part 2, we'll talk about what to do when it goes wrong. And it won't necessarily be like a first aid chat, but it'll be, these are the reasons why we do the things that we do. So when they say keep them still, well, why? When they say we've got to do this before we do that, there's an order to these things. So try and put over some of like the reasons why we do things the way that we do. And again, some of the considerations for like, if you do have to call an ambulance, when should you call, why should you call, what should you expect, what will the ambulance want when they get there, how best do we kind of manage the scene. Some of you that have been on coach courses, you'll have an overview of this because there's some of that incident management there. But
do a quick survey of the floor. How many people here have done first aid courses, either in the club or elsewhere?
Cool.
Enjoy.
Happy.
So we'll run another one in December.
Another show of hands. How many people have got first aid kit in their rucksack?
Might be a question for later, but I did an article for Windsock a year or 2 ago as to what I carry in my first aid kit. It varies depending on whether I'm restoring a furl or...
Yeah, I think if you're flying in Annecy, that might be very different from flying in Nepal. And if you're staying local, or if you're going on a vol, be it for 2 days backpacking in the mountains, I might be minded to carry a few more bits and pieces. But again, it's that, do you want an open face or a full face helmet? You tell me the kind of mishap you'll have, and then we can give you the best advice. But anyway, so after the little bit of chitter chatter and the explaining sort of some of the reasons for why we do some stuff, we'll have like a general Q&A. And I'm happy to talk about anything. I'm happy to talk about the perils of sponsorship, like competing at events, flying 2-liners, dealing with stuff at work. I'm open to answering literally anything. So, and again, if there's people, are there people online watching this through Zoom or something?
We'll edit it.
Alright, I was going to say, if there were online questions coming in, I did put a thing out and say if anyone had questions beforehand, but I hadn't heard from anyone.
Part of the problem is the internet here is really good.
Yeah, that's alright, that's cool. We'll pop on from that. So attitudes then. Attitudes are kind of important in aviation. The 2 things that keep you safe are attitude and altitude. So attitude is your pitch of the wing, and altitude is your distance from the ground. And if you've got both, well then you're never going to crash. But poor attitude can lead to stalls, spins, insipid problems. And a lack of altitude, normally fairly suddenly, is often referred to as controlled flight into terrain. But the 5 attitudes, these aren't in any particular order, but we'll just go through them one at a time and what they are and why they're a problem. So the anti-authority, these are the kind of stuff the rules kind of guys. These are the ones who don't want to be told what to do. They see rules as like, there for somebody else, they don't apply to me. And these would be the people who will typically take off and turn left, and then circle left, and circle left, and circle left. Even though all the rules say turn to the right, they'll be like, yeah, but that's where the lift is, that's where the glider thing is. They'll find a reason to justify their behaviour. But it is a hazardous attitude because rules are there for a reason. And normally rules are in place because somebody biffed up at some point. And so that's why the rule is introduced. That's why we have a rule about wearing a helmet of a certified type. Because people didn't, and then people got head injuries and people died and people had poor outcomes. So now we have a rule. But there will always be those people who are anti-authority of don't tell me what to do, I'd rather have a hat than a helmet. But that said, the caveat is, if there is a rule and you don't see the reason for the rule, then you're perfectly entitled to question it. There's nothing wrong with questioning rules. That doesn't make you anti-authority. That just makes you want to be a little bit more knowledgeable. So it's not a problem questioning rules, but you have to understand that the rules are there for a reason. So that's the anti-authority one. The impulsive, these are the kind of the do-it-quickly people. They're kind of all in a faff. Yeah, oh, I'm going to go now. Yeah, and they go off sort of half-assed, half-baked, half-prepared. They'll rush. And these are the kind of people that will go off with, they'll see a bird out front and they'll just shove everything on and go without the leg straps, and then slimming out the harness. So that's where the hazard comes with the impulsive attitude. People don't stop and think. And this is a sport that will punish mistakes. You don't have to be very high for things to really hurt. Gravity comes into play very, very quickly. So we really do need to sort of kind of think ahead and keep a lid on being impulsive. Just coming back on the impulsive one briefly, the other thing that sometimes happens with impulsive is that you'll be scratching or you'll be soaring and then the lift will die off, the sinking cycle will come through and you'll be suddenly back on the ridge and you'll have to slip in for a slope landing and you'll go, oh, I've got to land now, and you'll just do it without setting it up. And then that can lead to, wings in bushes, feet in rabbit holes, that sort of stuff. It's that doing things in a rush, so that's what we want to try and avoid. The invincible ones, these are the kind of people that think, this won't happen to me, I'm too good for this. Accidents happen to other people. Currently in the club we've got the British champion who's taken a year out. Accidents happen. And Andy's accident was literally just that.
There's a good YouTube video with Greg.
Excellent one.
It's about his accident.
Chap sitting in the kitchen. But pilots can't go around thinking they're invincible. If we've got the best pilots in Britain are getting hurt and broken. Guy Anderson got lost in the American outback for a little while. Kirsty's had sort of mishaps. I mean, Kirsty's one of the most talented pilots in the UK. But she's had a couple of mishaps. I mean, I've had two of my own. I've been broken, badly broken twice. We all know about sort of Chris Williams. A tremendously capable pilot, one of the safest people we know. And yet he got sort of smashed into the ground in Wiltshire not so long back. He's done a lot of charity work raising money for the ambulance.
There's a presentation from him online as part of the AGM.
Yeah, so he's been very prolific. So we can't go around thinking that we're invincible. So if you find yourself with an invincible attitude, you have to recognise that's kind of hazardous. So if we pop the next one on. And the invincible often kind of ties in with the macho, and this is like the tough guy, the brute force will overcome, more power, that kind of sense of daring do. And again, that'll just be oblivious to the warning signs and dangers, and that propensity to tough it out. And the macho and the invincible often kind of go hand in hand. So again, we'll see that in the aftermath of accidents. We'll realise leading up to that. And the reason we want to highlight these attitudes is that you might see these in your colleagues and your peers. I mean, all of us are here learning about safety, so probably none of us have a problem with our attitudes. We've all got a relevant thing. We've all turned to come up and get educated. But you might see somebody out on the hill with an attitude, and and you can then be like empowered to challenge that. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we've all seen a pilot who's an accident waiting to happen. You know, for a long time I was, you know, for those with memories, I was convinced that Vincent was going to get broken at one point. Yeah, just because of how he was and out on the hill, but he squared it away, and he became a really talented, capable pilot in the end.
Probably had all of those things.
Yeah, it's certainly the anti-authority and the impulsive, and certainly a fair bit of the invincible as well sometimes. But I mean, lovely guy, and turned out to be a talented pilot. But again, there were a number of people who had to pop along and have a quiet word and say, do you want to calm it down a little bit, because you're making people nervous. But then, so these are the big sort of four like really obvious ones, and then the last one is really insipid, and these are the people that are resigned, and this is just as hazardous. So these are the kind of people that think they can't make a difference, whatever will be, I'm going to crash, I'm not in control, I'm just going to hit this bush, and they're just resigned to their fate. So the people that are resigned, they'll also go along with something that's really unreasonable just because they want to be a nice guy. So they don't necessarily want to pipe up when something's not safe. And again, that's just as hazardous. So again, don't be resigned to this. We are sort of kind of in control.
I was thinking about this afternoon, and I think it's an attitude. It's something that we all witness from time to time. I'm not sure how best to describe it, but I call it showboating.
Yeah.
The guy who spiral dives down towards the windsock and ends up piling into the ground. Does it fall under one of these?
Well, there's a little bit of invincible, because they don't think they're going to come to any harm. There's a little bit of macho. Hey, look at me, puffy chest, chin up, chest out. So there is some of that. So I'd say that's the showboating thing's kind of a combination of the invincible and the macho, but also as well as the anti-authority, because I'm fairly sure there's a rule that says don't cock about over launch. Launch areas for launching, landing areas for landing. If you want to prat about and do your wingovers and piss off down the ridge, don't do it in front of where people are trying to get in their harness and flip their visor out and settle into people are stressed enough as it is on launch, and if you're trying to launch into somebody swinging in. But again, there's that whole sort of ego thing. I mean, the invincible thing's a big one, because people think accidents won't happen to them. I mean, I certainly, when I had my reserve throw, I didn't think for 1 minute that I was going to get got. I mean, nobody takes off with the idea that today's the day you're going to end it in the hospital. Nobody takes off with that thought in their mind. So everyone, to a certain extent, thinks they're invincible, because if you thought there was a chance that you might wind up in the hospital, you wouldn't even launch. So that invincible one is a bit slippy. It's a bit, you have to have a certain amount of it, because otherwise you wouldn't go and do it. You can't live in fear of these things, but you have to.
I was about to say that in a way we all must be guilty of that, because it's a dangerous sport.
Yeah.
So many good pilots end up in trouble.
Yeah.
You kind of think, well, it's only a matter of time before it happens to me, no matter how careful I am.
I mean, in the first 2 weeks after lockdown, we had 7 serious incidents and a fatality, and they were all experienced pilots. They were all people who should have known better. They were all people who shouldn't have made those mistakes. They happened, and again for a variety of reasons. But we're all at various times guilty of some of this. If we were really being honest with ourselves, there's that bit of introspection, that navel gazing, and you look back through the logbook. I mean, a friend of mine, Ian Stewart, had this thing called the safety factor. And it was like a little tick that you put on the end of your logbook. So if you've had a safe flight, so you're flying at sea, you check note arms before you went. If you forgot to check the note arms, you don't put the tick. If you took off cleanly, landed where you meant to, you could put the tick, you've had a safe flight. But if you tripped, fell, got plucked, twisted, then if something was a little bit out of control or untoward, if you weren't quite safe, if you had a nearly moment, you wouldn't put the tick. And when he started being really honest with himself and saying, like, really, was I as safe as I could have been with my flights? He realised he was only safe for about, maybe half to 3/4 of his flights. So he worked really hard to try and make all of his flights safe. And it was like an excellent sort of attitude to have, to try and have that kind of safety focus. Like, have I done everything? Because you are higher than you can survive falling, and you are going faster than you can run. All the time. And I know a lot of the time we're serenely floating around, but we've all been at theme parks and taken a drop over the roller coaster. That stuff gets pretty quick. It's amazing just how effective gravity is at bringing you back down. But cool. If we pop on to the next bit. So as a sort of further reading on this, there is the XEMAG article. Like I say, we may well try and get that into Windsock then. If people have like back issues lying around, feel free to like share them and have a nose. I think it's 234, but I'll double check and I'll put a message out in the group and let you guys know. I'll check it when I get home tonight. But that was the issue. So there's a sort of kind of expansion to the attitudes piece, and there's also a bit about some of the work that I do as well in there. And there's a few other sort of bits and pieces as well, so that's quite interesting. There's also 2 books that I would hugely recommend if you're interested in any of this sort of human behaviour stuff, why people do the things that they do, and these are on the next bit. There's one called Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez, and this is stories of people who didn't know any better and survived in like really quite extreme circumstances. Marooned at sea, lost in the jungle. No background, no training, but managed to pull it out of the bag. But it's also stories of people who really should have known better, who died doing something really stupid. And all of the stories, you're never quite sure which way these stories are going to go, but they're all true. But the Deep Survival book goes through the process of why these people made these decisions that they did, what led them to do that, what's going on fundamentally with like your sort of kind of your animal instincts, as it were. You have people have like either a fight or flight response when they get like an adrenaline stimulus, and depending on your personality, you'll go one of 2 ways. But there's all these sort of drivers and hormones and triggers and that in the body that drive you to do these things and behave this way. And this book goes into some of that. So the kind of the why of who lives and who dies. So the Lawrence Gonzalez book is well worth checking out. And because it's a series of short stories, like you can read a bit, put it down, read a bit, put it down, read a bit, put it down. It's easy to get through in a week, or you can just plough it through in a weekend. It's a great read. And then the other one is Matt's book. I don't know if you guys know Matt Warren, who's occasionally down this way. Another London-based pilot, journalist by trade, I think. But he put together this book with Miriam Frankel, and again, it's based on studies, science, evidence. There's reasons for why people think the way they do. And it talks about all the things that will sort of kind of cloud your judgment. Late, tired, stressed, row with the wife, stressed with the kids, turn up to go flying, and then all of a sudden you're impulsive, and then your hazardous attitude is there. So are you thinking clearly, and how can you recognise when you're not, and what can you do about it? And there's a lot of really sort of interesting insights into this book, and even just like kind of personal life, professional life, it makes a big difference. But as a pilot, our sport, it really isn't physical. There's nothing physical about it. It's all mental. It's where do you turn? Like the actual process of turning a wing isn't. It's not a physical game like rugby, say. It's much more sort of thinky. It's such a mental sport. So that whole kind of clarity of thought is really good. If you get your podcast and stuff, then the Gavin McClure podcast is really good, and Matt goes through some of this stuff with Gavin. And one of the interesting things they talk about in the podcast is Gavin's memory of an incident that happened at sea, and Gavin's recall of the incident was dramatically different from what he'd actually written in his log at the time. and like how your mind sort of plays tricks on you and sort of recounting events and sort of what happened, what went down and why. So those kind of things. But yeah, 2 interesting books. So if you're fascinated by any of the kind of stuff that we talk about with attitudes and mindsets, then that's all good. So cool. So staying safe then. So if we've had a check-up from the neck up and we've got a straight head, then I thought of 5 things that we can try and do to stay safe. Because as I say, none of us want to get hurt because it's deeply unpleasant. So number 1, avoid conflict. And it sounds really silly. I mean, there's the whole like Fight Club thing. You don't talk about Fight Club. But then there's that whole other side of thing. You've got rule 1: don't hit anyone. Like, don't hit them on the ground. Don't hit them in the air. Just don't hit people. And you can have that thing where the ridge is on your right and you've got to give right away. But there comes a point when you're above the ridge, and is the ridge still on the right, or are you now just in free air? So if I can borrow Robin for a second, and we'll just do like a little example. And if we just come towards each other and we'll just pretend that the wall is the ridge,
yep.
And we're flapping along. Oh, you got the ridge on your right, I better turn around and we'll go this way. And then I'll turn around at the end of the ridge, and then we'll turn back. So, so we might shimmy.
So I'm going this way.
Yeah, so you're going to bump me off the end of the ridge, but at some point you're going to turn. Yeah, and then we'll go back.
Go across in front of you.
And then I'll just follow you back down the ridge. But we're just avoiding conflict. Yeah, but I can see that he's got the ridge on his right, so I'm going to turn, and he's not going to push me off the end of the ridge. He's going to turn back and let me come. Yeah, and we seamlessly work together, and that kind of works. But if we're now in open space, so if we do this thing again, if we imagine the ridge isn't there and we're 500 feet up, we're now kind of coming together. Now actually, are we converging? So am I on the right and in the right? So now I don't have to turn. Whereas before, with the ridge on the right, I had to turn.
You're on the left.
Yeah, but if we're coming together...
Okay, if we're going this way...
Yeah, so we're now coming together. I'm on the right. Are we converging? So who needs to turn? So that's where these whole questions around conflict come in. You can't always think that the other guy has to turn. You have to take steps before you collide. So that whole like kind of avoiding conflict thing is really key, because you can't just stop. You've got to keep moving. If you try and stop, you stall, spin. Yeah, the number of times people have lost it in the gaggle, and then there's like chaos and carnage. So again, that avoiding conflict is a really sort of key thing, and the primary driver is like just don't hit anyone. If it all gets a bit crowded and it all gets a bit much and it's all getting a bit nippy tucky, just come out, land, give it 5 minutes, let them climb out, and then you can fly tomorrow. Whereas if you collide and it all goes a bit unravelled, then that kind of puts tomorrow in jeopardy. So that's one with staying safe. But the conflicts are easy to bring up, but they're also easy to resolve. You can just have a chat afterwards. Yeah, I mean, I've had days at the dike where I've been coming along, ridge on the right, I've been in the bowl, coming back towards launch, and the hang line has taken off and turned left. I'm just like, oh, well, I've got nowhere to go. I'm boxed in. So I've had to turn to avoid getting hit, and then the hang line has just overtaken me and just forced me into the bowl, and then I've just been dumped into like kind of where the trees are. But it's all you can do in that is go and find them afterwards, go and have a conversation and say, look, did you realise what you did? And from their perspective, they thought they'd given me plenty of room and they didn't see what the issue was, and so we had an adult grown-up conversation about it afterwards, and we managed to sort of resolve things without any sort of big issues. But the other person will always have a completely different point of view, because you can sit there thinking, oh yeah, he flew into me, but from their point of view, you flew into them, because you've only got those two perspectives, and that's somebody sitting there with a GPS track watching who turns and when. But yeah, just rule one: just don't hit anyone. Keep an eye out, look before you turn, and try and avoid those situations where there's going to be conflict. If you are coming together on the ridge, be prepared to turn out, be prepared to make room, be prepared to, samber it. You don't have to crisscross. You can just two people work together, and that works. And then once one of you's up enough to start turning, and then there's no more conflict, and then there's room for other people. I think the dike has more conflict than any other site. I don't think we have these problems at like Firle or Bo Peep or Caburn. I think it's only really the dike that has sort of bigger issues. But again, I mean, travel the UK and fly in different places and see what it's like in the peaks. I mean, I don't go up there much, but they've got huge numbers and sometimes it's a bit scratchy. So, but I think they've got maybe a bit more room spread out. So, anyway, number 2, control your pitch, control your rotation. This is something that comes out of Civ courses. If ever any of you have been on one of Toby Columbi's courses, this is all he bangs on about, like all the time. Don't let it turn, don't let it pitch.
Just as a brief comment at this point. The next 3 of these meetings, we've got Steve Purdy talking about SIV, Gary Burkett talking about his 6 weeks in Luminous doing SIV and acro training, and then we've got Jenny Fleming doing her pitch on the Fly Sussex Cape on SIV.
Okay.
I wanted to call them indoor SIV.
Okay.
You can learn the theory, but it's really about the practice.
Yeah. But yeah, the controlling the pitch and the rotation is really kind of key. There's a common misconception that gliders, collapse for a variety of reasons, but they only really collapse when they're offline, when they're off axis. So you've either got too much yaw and a tip comes in, or you've got too much roll and a tip comes in, or you've got too much pitch and the front comes in. So it's only really when the airflow over the glider is off its axis. So if the glider's been twisted or rolled or pitched, and then the air's hitting the top surface, not coming from underneath, that's what makes gliders collapse. So if you're in control of the pitch and the rotation of the glider, then you're not going to get wound up, you're not going to get twisted, you're not going to get spun. When you do have a big collapse, weight shift away, don't stall the flying side. And just be aware of where the glider is in relation to the ground forward and behind. If the glider's behind, hands up. When it starts shooting, brake it, control the pitch. Don't have those sudden changes. But I say I'll leave more of that Civ stuff for the people who talk and instruct it. But being able to control the pitch and the rotation, it stops incidents developing, it stops cascades coming. So that really kind of helps. And again, especially if you're low, getting pitched and turned into the ground. I mean, for those that haven't seen the video about Andy, that's kind of the spoilers. He got a big collapse, got turned, had the collapse out, but the rotation had already happened, so he's facing the ground and he's now in a canyon with nowhere to go. So he arrived very fast and then got broken in the process. But if there's that control of the rotation, then you don't wind up facing the wrong way. If there's that control of the rotation, but then sometimes you can't manage to do that without stalling what you've got left of flying. So it's a difficult thing. But something to think about certainly. Keep a margin, have a bit of room. How close is too close? And it kind of depends on the speed. If you're going a little bit quicker, you want to be maybe a little bit further out from the ground and the trees and the bushes and the fences. When you're looking to land, don't land right next to the cars. Have a bit of room, just in case. But we get broken by hitting stuff, and if you're a little bit further from stuff, you've got a bit more room before you hit it. It sounds silly, but it's true. But it will help. Okay. Next one. coast and nutter. Coast is something that comes from the driver training that we do with the ambulance work. I think the police started this one maybe, but it's been rolled out to most blue light people, and if ever you wind up on a speed awareness course, I think they mention it there as well. So it's constantly observe and anticipate to get space and time. So if you're looking at what's around and what's happening and how things are changing and how things are moving, then you can keep yourself with space, you've got a margin, and then because you've got space, you've got time to deal with something. There was a video that got shared recently of a guy taking a whack out in Bassano. I think he was flying a Zeno, and the guy behind him was on a boom, and the glider blows out, drops back, and you see the guy on the boom sort of just come up and have a hugely banked turn to avoid him. It's on the social media. I'll see if I can find a link later, and we'll slip that into the edit. But that whole thing of, because the guy on the boom was observing and he anticipated what was going to happen, he was able to generate some space and time. He kept a margin, so he didn't find himself with a face full of pilot. So the nutter thing is something that came from a HEMS chat. So HEMS are the helicopter people, the Helicopter Emergency Medical Service. And the nutter thing is notice, understand and think ahead, which is similar to the observe and anticipate, but it's just done in a slightly different way. But if we're all a bunch of nutters, then we're all noticing, understanding and thinking ahead. Step one of dealing with any kind of problem is recognising there's a problem. So that's why we point out the attitudes thing. If you recognise you've got an issue with your attitude, then you can address it. You have to recognise that there's a problem. You have to notice that there's something that's astray. And if you understand the situation and you understand what's going on with like the pitch and the rotation, you can think ahead. You can understand what you need to do, and you can think about, right, well, this is where I am now, where am I going to be? Now I can take steps and I can move it, I can change it, I can do something different. I can affect the outcome. I'm not resigned to my fate. So these things all start to kind of intertwine and then link together. So the nutter really sort of kind of helps. And again, sort of flying in crowds, you notice the guy in the orange glider just coming in. If you understand and think ahead to where he's going to be and where you're going to be, then you know, well, you're on the right, I should have right away, but he's getting a bit close, so he should have turned, but he hasn't, so I'm go. You've got your plan B, and then your plan C, and then your plan D. If you get plan J, things have gone a little off-piste, but at least you're thinking ahead, and you're not then surprised, and you're not acting in an impulsive manner because you're having to suddenly deal with something and then making a poor choice. So again, these things help stave off some of the perilous behaviours that we kind of covered off earlier. So the coast and the nutter, whichever one of the two that you want to have in your head, they will really help you. And again, particularly with crowds, and particularly like changing winds. If you're flying in New Haven and all of a sudden there's more like white horses on the sea. If you notice the sea state and understand what that means, then you can think ahead to, well actually, do you know what, top landing might be a little bit dicey now because I'm on the top of the cliff in the rotor and the bushes and the gorse. Maybe actually I'll be a little bit safer if I go and land on the beach. Maybe the wind has shifted, so maybe there's going to be a little less lift on the New Haven run. Maybe we can think ahead and actually go, do you know what, maybe I won't take that next gap, maybe I'll turn back now. And it's a way of staying safer. You notice what's going on, you understand the implications of what you're observing, and you think ahead to what that means. So again, hopefully it's a thing to help you think about staying safe. And then the last one then, so this is call out and challenge, so shitty behaviour and hazardous attitudes. If you see someone who's being a bit reckless, showboaty, call them out. You're a talented pilot, capable pilot, should you be setting a better example? Do you realise like kind of how close you are, you're not keeping a margin? And again, there's ways of doing it, and again, it depends on whether they're going to be receptive to it. Because if they're one of those anti-authority types and you're coming in with your coach hat on, I've got my red baseball cap back and I'm going to go and have a word with Wagger Boy. you know, that's going to go down like a lead balloon. Or maybe not. Maybe it will go down like a helium balloon. It just won't go down at all. So again, finding a way to challenge people sometimes is kind of like the big battle of the coach. But if you see something that's a little bit scary and a little bit sort of, you know, unsettling, you can always have a word with, you know, the coaches, and then the coaches amongst themselves can have a little conflab. It's like, yeah, well, maybe we've got a problem with Derek, and then we'll nominate someone that Derek will listen to go and have a word with Derek. Because even with the anti-authority people, they've still got someone they respect. They've still got someone that they'll listen to. They've still got someone that they'll heed. And again, just finding the way. I mean, sometimes just take them to the pub and buy them a pint and then having a chat and then working up to it half an hour down the line. That could be a way around of dealing with it. One of the things about doing the coach course is that gives you skills to challenge that. So if you've not been on a coach course yet and you're CP plus 10, then I really would advocate taking a weekend out over the winter and doing the coach course, because it helps, gives you insights into your own sort of learning and learning styles and learning behaviour and how you want to approach stuff, because then you think about how other people learn too. But also as well, it helps you pick up and highlight stuff. You might not have the understanding of what it is that you're seeing, but then all of a sudden you've then got the way of articulating what it is. You can put it into words why, you know, this top landing approach that Derek did the other week was a bit dodge, but now you've got a way of describing it, and now you've got a skill set to go and challenge him on it. Because if he does get broken, it's going to ruin everyone's day, because everyone's going to have to land, we're going to have to get their ambulance in, we're going to have to get... So we want to avoid these kind of things in the first place.
As a club, we generally have a coach course every couple of years. BHBA come down the weekend, we usually do it by Sussex. We're planning to have one November, December this year. The current series of booked club coach courses is finished, and they haven't yet released dates which they offer up to the clubs to say, yes, we'd like to do one on this date. But I'm hoping we'll pick that reasonably soon.
Yeah. But there's also ones that will happen in like Thames Valley and Wessex. And
they've all happened now, Phil. There aren't any more now, as far as I know, until the next set of dates are released and booked. Yeah,
but yeah, I'd certainly advocate like doing the coach course, because when you hang around with people who know less than you and have seen less than you, it makes you realise how far you've come, and you can get some confidence and some experience, and you stop feeling like the new guy so much. But also as well, if you've been doing it a while, it'll highlight things that perhaps you didn't realise you were doing about your own flying. And when you start observing other people and start paying attention to what they do, you might notice them do things that you don't, or you might notice them. You'll look at sort of habits and routines in a way that you can then bring that into your own flying. Like with Ian and his logbook. It was only from doing the coaching that we talked about that, but that's made me much safer. My last accident was 2015. I've had one slightly scruffy top landing since, and I've had one slightly scruffy launch since. But I've not had a big whoa, there I go moment. Since way back then. But that's partly because I've taken a lot of steps into staying safe. I decided that the last accident really was the last one. And yet bizarrely I'm still flying the lightest thing I can get my hands on. It is a proper addiction. I mean, every bloody club night we do like a little round, hi, my name's Phil, and you kind of feel like an addict. You sat in a circle telling your tales. So that's kind of the staying safe bit. So we're kind of about 45 minutes in. That's sort of 5 things to think about. Does that sound like suitable intermission territory? Is everyone looking like empty glasses?
We had a good discussion on one of the Telegram groups recently when I posted a link to a YouTube video of when paragliding goes wrong. It's quite a long video, and pretty much everything that could go wrong, sea landings, mid-airs and so on. didn't see the other pilot.
Yeah.
Recognition, I've seen it, and I know what it means. All right, that's an asymmetric collapse. Reaction, if it's an asymmetric collapse, this is what I should do. And then execution, did I do it properly?
Yeah.
And that seemed to be quite a good model for looking at, because you've got to get all those things right.
Yes.
In order to avoid the mishaps.
Yeah, the coach course, they often describe it as like the Swiss cheese with loads of holes in it. It's only when all the holes line up that you actually get through to accident and injury. But right at the very beginning, there's that attitude in the first place. So you're either impulsive, or you're invincible, or you see it and then don't deal with it properly because you were resigned to your fate, or so that's where some of that sort of stems in. But the attitudes thing that came up was when the Americans went into it was the FAA, so it was like civil aviation, so it's their equivalent of the CAA. They went into all the sort of the human factors, the human sides of what happened. So they took out all the mechanical failures and all of the the blown tyres and the disconnected kit and the metal fatigue and all of that sort of stuff. And they just looked at how people got themselves into the situation where they then had an accident. And so that was where all those sort of attitudes came from, and they were identified in the run-up and the lead-up. One of my favourite things about accidents is something that came from Kelly Farina. Kelly, for those that don't know, does like a XE guiding type stuff. It runs, I think it's Austrian Arena is his company. But he wrote a book called Mastering Paragliding. It was edited by Andrew Craig. So Andrew's well known amongst the club. But Kelly would often say that it's like a roll of the dice. But the thing that will screw you up is the 7. It wasn't even there, didn't even consider it. You're rolling dice, 1s and 6s. Double 1, miss a turn, you can take that. But you roll a 7, that wasn't even on the dice when you threw the things. You've just got 7 spots on there. That'll be the thing that screws you up, the thing that you really just didn't see coming. The other one that I really like as well about safety is Will Gadd's thing. If any of you are on to like paragliding forum, Will Gadd wrote a whole bunch of stuff over a number of years. But one of the best things he wrote was about recognising the territory that you're in. Are you in the land of cuts and bruises, or are you in the land of broken bones? Or are you in the land of mortal peril? What territory are you currently in? Yes, paragliding is a dangerous sport, but if we're going flying at the coast when the tide's out, then maybe not so much. But if we're like first day of spring in the crowds and it's blowing 20 miles an hour on launch and you're launching in the lulls, then that's a different kind of territory. And can we recognise what kind of territory we're in? So again, that was I thought quite beneficial. I'll see if I can find some links to that as well, and then we'll share that kind of in the edit.
I don't know whether he covers it, but I know Will Gadd's been on Gavin McClurg's podcast quite frequently.
Yeah, Gavin McClurg's podcasts are just generally excellent, but there's now sort of like kind of 200 of them almost, so you've got to kind of cherry pick the ones. But Matt Warren's one is really good, and Matt Wilkes' one is really good. If you find the Gavin McClurg chat with Matt Wilkes, that's really good. Matt's a doctor. I forget what he's doctor of. He's got a particular specialty, but I think he gets involved in a lot of some kind of extreme survival, wilderness medicine, all of that sort of stuff. So having mishaps out in the wilds, which of course for us is kind of insightful and fascinating. But any more on these bits, or should we get some fluids and reconvene in a bit? All good? Everyone back?
Andrew had to go.
Okay. Alright. Cool. Right, so part 2. So what to do when it all goes bang. So generally, someone will stuff it in a pile of, disappearing you, but ooh, that looks like it hurts, and everyone will go rushing over. And again, the sort of hazardous attitude thing kind of creeps in because people can be a little bit impulsive, like, got to get there, got to race in. So this is where we do the whole Dr. ABC thing, if we can look. Don't always need the helicopter, and that isn't me, sort of stock image, I think. But the Dr. ABC thing is a sort of mnemonic that hopefully we've all been on first aid courses, haven't we? With the show of hands earlier. Anyone who's not done a first aid course? You're all kind of vague, I remember this bit. So the bits all stand for bits, but what we've done with this one is put the little in there. Because specifically for trauma we want to worry about a catastrophic hemorrhage. So what I'll do, I thought I'd talk about some of the D bit, the sort of the bits and pieces that make up the mnemonic. And why it's in the order it's in. So when somebody first has an accident, we need to check for the danger. Because we don't want to add to it. Yeah, if you've got somebody who's strung up on the edge of the cliff at New Haven, the last thing we want is somebody trying to help and get tangled in a wing and then stepping on a bit of nylon and slipping and falling over and adding to the casualty list, or worse still, going down the face. So again, just being mindful of the danger, not rushing to aid, not being impulsive. So again, cool heads, in times of crisis, always kind of win out. And then we want a response from the patient. So that's the R bit. I think I've got these on individual slides. If we cycle through, there we go, responsive. So even if they moan and groan, if they can tell you their name and what day of the week it is, then that's great. But if you just Derek, shout and a shake, and, if you get some kind of response, then that's useful. The next thing to check will be the catastrophic hemorrhage, because if somebody is bleeding out, then by the time you phone for help, they'll already be dead. So you do need to check for sort of serious wounds and bleeding, and this will be things that are spraying, spurting, so those kind of things. Thankfully rare with our kind of thing, but we talk about 4 on the floor when we talk about bleeding. So there's 4 cavities in the body where bleeding can happen, and then you've got what's on the floor. So in terms of assessing a catastrophic hemorrhage, if you're looking at something spurting out, it's going to end up on the floor. But there are 4 cavities in the body where you can have bleeding happen, and it can cause you problems. So that's your head, your chest, your abdomen, and then your long bones. There's not a huge amount you can do for somebody who's bleeding inside their chest without some surgical techniques, but recognition that that's going on is kind of key. If somebody's got a really big bleeding problem, they will be very pale, they'll be very clammy, they'll have a very fast heart rate, they'll look like crap and feel like crap. So if there's no obvious wounds but they're still in that state of shock, then have a high degree of suspicion, especially if it's a big impact. The caveat with this is with the long bone fractures. So if somebody's broken a femur, so this is the long bone that goes between the hip and the knee. If somebody has broken a part of that, then the blood supply can bleed out into the cavity. If you imagine the bones coming apart in the muscle, you'd have a lot of swelling there. There's a lot of room for blood to drain. And if somebody's broken both legs, that can be potentially fatal. And the way to deal with that is to pull the ankle so that the bones can come back and realign, and then that ease the swelling, so applying that traction. So if somebody has a lot of pain and a big obvious swelling in the middle of the leg, then pulling the ankle can alleviate some of the problems. But again, that's a sort of thing that we'll go over on sort of first aid courses. But just to make you aware that you don't necessarily have to have blood on the floor for catastrophic hemorrhage to be present. From an ambulance point of view, we have a trauma tree. So it's like a flowchart of decisions. So if your disease has a moustache and a hat and glasses, then you're going to go to the major trauma centre. So for us, any fall over 5 metres, regardless of your current physical state, if you've fallen more than 5 metres, in London, you will go to the major trauma centre for assessment, and ideally within the hour of insult. So if you fell at 12 noon, they want you in the CT scanner by 1. So that's, and 5 metres isn't the height of a wing. So you don't have to fall very far for potentially very, very serious injuries. So that it's something to be mindful of when you're assessing the patient. So we talked about the danger and the response and the hemorrhage. The next thing we want to check would be the airway. The reason that we do the airway before we do pulses or breathing is because the body needs oxygen. You can do about 4 weeks without food, you can do about 4 days without water, but you can only do about 4 minutes without oxygen before you start having sort of brain damage and big serious problems. So 15 minutes of no oxygen and you're probably heading for cardiac arrest, where the heart will spasm and then stop beating. The first bit of cardiac arrest is always a bit of flappy, and that's the bit that we can use the defib and we can do the shocks, because the shock will stop it flapping and allow it to come back to a coordinated rhythm. But the reason for checking the airway is to get oxygen in. If you don't have oxygen going in and out, it doesn't matter that the blood's going round and round, because what's in the blood is no good. If there's no oxygen in the blood, it doesn't matter that the heart's still pumping. So the airway has to be open. With someone who's had a big impact, the easiest way to open the airway is to position and posture. Roll them on the side, don't let them choke on vomit. But if we're worried about spinal trauma and necks, you can push the jaw forward so you can chin lift. And again, this is the sort of thing that we'll cover on the first aid course. So you can have one person holding their head still and keeping everything lined up. So not still, like off to one side, but straighten them out, make them aligned, and then somebody else can lift the chin. And that just keeps the tongue out of the way of the airway, especially if somebody's on their back. Often you'll find if somebody's piled in and they're kind of like face down, they'll be every time they're breathing, and they'll have that big obvious sort of snoring sound. And again, rolling them over gently, keeping their head in line with the body and the neck, and keeping everything in a line is kind of key. But if you don't sort their airway out, then it's only going to go south from there. With the airway, if they're able to sit up and talk, then they're maintaining their own airway. They can keep their tongue out of the way. It's only really in the unconscious patient that you've got to really worry about this, because everything's limp, loose and floppy. When you assess them, you touch them first of all. If they've got some tone, they'll be stiff, rigid response, they can pull away, they've got control, they've got purposeful movements. Then again, you don't have to worry about the airway. But if they're limp, loose and floppy, they're like a rag doll, you lift the hand, they drop it back down, and it's all floppy. You've got to assume that everything else around is going to be floppy. The breathing on the next slide. Ideally, we want somewhere between 10 and 20 breaths a minute, just normal. If you just run over to somebody, you'd be a little bit out of breath with some exertion. But again, if somebody's got adequate breathing, they'll normally be a reasonable colour. Inadequate breathing, they'll be a little bit dusky blue, pale, cyanosed. So if somebody's not breathing particularly well, then there's signs in the face that they don't look well. When you're looking at somebody's breathing, if one side of the chest is moving and another one isn't, then that's bad. You've got 2 lungs, they should both be going the same. And again, noisy breathing is bad. If there's any kind of whistling when they're sucking in, or any kind of wheezing when they're breathing out, and again, that's potentially bad. And every once in a while, we do have pilots that have got their own sort of breathing problems. You get people with COPD, you get people with asthma, out on the hills, and occasionally you might have somebody land and just doesn't get up, and they're having an asthma attack for some reason. Have they got their inhalers and stuff? So again, if you know the people you're flying with, you know who's got health problems. There's a guy who flies in Devon and Folkestone who knows he's allergic to bee stings, carries an EpiPen. But we all know that. So and we know if he's got problems, we know where it is in his harness, because he's got an issue that he's told us about. But yeah, screening, ideally we want sort of 10 and 20 breaths a minute. We want things to be the same both sides. We want people to have a good colour to their face. So anything that's like dusky or blue is kind of bad. And then the next bit, the C, everyone always used to say it's for circulation, and we've kind of gone away from teaching people to check for pulses. The C is the call for help. Now this is after all the other bits, because when you call for help, they're going to want to know the answers to the first 4 bits. They're going to want to know if they're responsive, if they're awake, are they breathing, is there any bleeding. They're going to want to know the answers to those, because they're going to want to know what kind of help to send. They might just send an ambulance by road. They might send an ambulance by road and a helicopter. They might send a car to get there quick and then send a truck for transport later. If they're sending 3 or 4 people, then they might send an officer to manage the scene. So you might wind up with like 5 or 6 vehicles for someone who's just sprained a wrist. But if you've got a big fall from height and somebody's had a big impact, then tell them that on the phone. When you do phone up, the call takers have a script to go through. So you can't just explain the situation and have them figure it out. They've got to go through things in a certain order. And they can't go on to the next page until they finish the first page. So when you phone up, you ask for an ambulance, you explain that it's a fall from height, it's in a remote location, and then wait for them to ask you questions and work with them. Don't try and tell them stuff, let them ask you. One of the best ways of getting a precise location now is using what 3 words. So if you've got the app on your phone, you can use 3 words specifically to tell you where you are. If we do the 3 words for this place, let's have a look. Scariest surpasses trombone. Apparently, that's where we are. But those 3 words will be unique to this 3 metre square that we're currently in. If I go over there, we'll have another 3 words. I mean, the next 3 words a little bit over. Narrates hotspots respected. With these 3 words, some of the 3 words are plurals, some are not. So you might have to be particular when you're spelling, and if you are going to spell stuff out, do the phonetic alphabet. Use H for hotel, not H for Harry. Don't go off piste with that sort of stuff. So if you are going to spell stuff out, use the phonetic alphabet. That saves any sort of kind of mix-ups. If you can make that bit slicker and quicker. Obviously consider when you have got an accident, do you really, really, really need the air ambulance? If you have someone who's literally just got a broken wrist and they can move their feet and they can sit up and they can stand and they can support themselves and we can use a sling, then potentially we can just put them in a car and drive them to a hospital and we can save the resources. There is a myth that goes around that ambulance crews are sat in mess rooms drinking tea and eating biscuits waiting for the phone to ring, and that's just not true. Fire brigade, maybe. But the ambulance service is generally job to job to job to job to job. In London we have a little computer in the front of the ambulance, and it has a button on there that you cycle through. So you get dispatched, you'll be amber en route because you could be diverted to something else. But when you're with a patient, you're then red and unavailable because you're dealing with that patient. And you'll be red at scene, red on the way to hospital, red at hospital, until you then become green and available. And we call it greening up. So we almost never have ambulance crews, 2 people in a vehicle with a bed and a stretcher and all the goings. We almost never have those readily available waiting for the phone to ring. They're almost always out dealing with somebody, and we need somebody to become available in order to deal with something. It might be a little bit different in the sticks. I mean, we've got CCAM down this way. I'm pretty sure it's CCAM rather than SCAS down here, isn't it? CCAM. Yeah. But even with CCAM, they might have a green crew, but they might be in like Ashford, in which case they'll never get here. We'll need somebody to green up from Brighton. And again, yeah, the crews might have a bit of a run to get to us. So if we had a mishap at the dyke, We can give them the what 3 words for where the incident actually physically is, but then if we can tell them it's, you know, the Devil's Dyke pub and it's got a postcode and we know where we are when we're making the phone calls, just it's that notice, understand and think ahead thing. You know, if you know you're going to need an ambulance, well, where are they going to get? Are they going to park at the bottom and come up, or are they going to park at the top and walk down? You know, what's going to be best? Think that through before you make the call. And again, if you've got 3 or 4 of you dealing with one broken person, then try and assign roles. So one person will go and meet the ambulance, one person will go and, you know, relay messages, one person will pack the stuff, one person will reassure the patient. So, and again, depending on the type of injuries we've got, depends on what's needed at the time. So again, simple things like, you know, sprains, strains, slips, falls, people can be assisted, people can be helped. Don't underestimate the power of a harness to carry somebody. You know, if you've got 4 people, 1 on each leg strap and 1 on each shoulder strap, you can actually use that as like kind of like makeshift stretcher, and you can get somebody to somewhere that's more accessible. You can kind of keep a cocoon, splinted, supported, safe. Splinting injuries and immobilising people is a great thing for pain relief. Yeah, if somebody has got an extra elbow, they've got a bit between the bends and it shouldn't, just holding it into the body and keeping it safe is a really good tip. And even if you don't have a sling, you can use a jumper. So you can roll the jumper up, tuck the elbow in, and you've got a makeshift sling. You can adapt and overcome. Yeah, we're all resourceful, capable people. And if we understand the principles of what we're doing and why, then we can find solutions. Often when people have a mishap, they'll have a lot of adrenaline going on because they've had this big stimulus of fight or flight. So they'll be on the adrenaline come down after the accident. The adrenaline will mask a lot of the pain, i.e. your function, because it goes back to those primeval days when you're able to run away from the lion. Yeah, you put a thorn in your foot, you're going to keep running because the adrenaline will mask the pain. And, yeah, your achy leg muscles, your adrenaline will mask that, so you can keep running from the lion. Stops you getting eaten. But again, in the modern world, yeah, having a big smack, yeah, you get people have an overdose of adrenaline. And that'll give them the dry mouth, and that'll give them the tremors, that'll give them the shakes, that'll give them palpitations. They'll feel really out of sorts and really unsettled. And when the heart beats really fast, it doesn't pump the blood so effectively because it doesn't have time to fill and then push. So again, people can look a little bit pale, grey, clammy, but after a couple of minutes they should start to recover. But if they still look pale, grey and clammy after a couple of minutes and they've still got that fast heart rate, that may well be signs of shock and a worsening hemorrhage. Because that hemorrhage doesn't happen straight away, that progresses and develops over time. So you might get somebody who's got a big injury on the inside and they'll be fine initially and then unwell later. So anyone who's had a smack needs to get checked. But sometimes it is quicker and easier to put them in a car and drive them. Sometimes it's better and safer to keep them still and to not move them. So if ever in doubt, they're on the side of caution, and talk to the people on the phone. Initially, when you phone up, you'll get a call taker. You'll get somebody who's very good at smashing the details into the computer and filling out the cash forms and dispatching crews. But if you've got a bit of a wait for an ambulance to turn up, you might well get a paramedic ring you back and want to go through what's going on in a little more detail. In London, we have advanced paramedics, and they have a particular criteria of calls that they'll look at. So in and out, the advanced paramedics will phone up and ask for a little more detail about the nature of these injuries. Yeah, if you've got a skateboarder that's come off the top of a ramp or something and he's unconscious, then the advanced paramedic might call back with some triage and advice over the phone and be able to talk people through while they're waiting for the crews to turn up. So that may well happen down here too. So there's something else.
I was quite surprised. I think we had an accident, was it last week or maybe a fortnight ago? We had somebody injured at the dyke and the helicopter came in. I wasn't there, I just saw the messages about it. Well, it might be
yeah, somebody stuffed in a fill recently.
But what I was going to say was that the message from the injured person a few hours later was that, thanks for everybody's concern. It turns out it's just bruising and going to be fine. But we've ended up having the air ambulance out.
Yeah.
Obviously, we are on the side of caution.
Yeah.
But that's not the first one of those. There was another one a couple of years ago at Furl where someone had hurt their ankle and the air ambulance was out.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that last one he was unconscious for a short while.
But the decision to send the helicopter isn't ours.
No.
The decision to send the helicopter is the person who's doing the dispatching.
We had a talk from the air ambulance a while ago. One of the points which they emphasise, it's often overlooked, is the air ambulance contains highly qualified medics, and just because the patient is not taken away in the air ambulance as a sort of transport vehicle doesn't mean it wasn't right to have those people get to the site and tend to the casualty very quickly.
A lot of the times, HEMS in London, they'll turn up in the helicopter and then the patient will go by road with the HEMS doctor in the back of the ambulance. So the helicopter will bring the medics and the stuff, but then the patient will still go by road, but with medical care on board.
The other point that they made was that with the HEMS helicopter, they won't take the patient away until he's stabilised.
Yes.
It's not necessarily a way of getting them to the hospital quickly. It's a way of ensuring that as quickly as possible they're stabilised and then in a condition that they can be transported.
That makes sense.
Yeah. A lot of it depends on the kind of injury that you've got. I mean, the last big one that I was involved in was somebody who broke a pelvis, locked out on tow. So the pilot went up, glider went back, glider rotated, everyone comes down, she fell from the back 10 metres maybe, but kind of attached the tow line and paraglider, so it wasn't like a straight release fall, unbroken, but it was a significant impact. But what was significant about that was the way that things changed. I think I've got this in the next slide. So next step. So once we've had an assessment and we've made a call, so this is like kind of like the next things that we want on. So we talk about basic first aid. So if something's spurting out, direct pressure, and then indirect pressure, and then elevate the wound. So if somebody's broken an arm, they've got bone sticking out, lots of bleeding, or they've been dragged through a fence and they've got cuts and scrapes, cover the wound, keep it clean, that sort of stuff. So basic first aid. We don't necessarily need to do anything sort of really off-piste. You always hear the horror stories about the guy with the Swiss Army knife and the biro. He's just like waiting the paints. I mean, I've been involved in the ambulance service for 13 years and never known anyone had to do that. So just the basic stuff will do. And if you've been to a first aid work course and you can put a dressing on and know that it'll stay there, that will do. If you can use a triangular bandage in a bunch of different ways, then again, that will do. It's amazing what you can do with 2 triangular bandages. You can use one as a dressing pad and then the other one to hold it in place. You can have slings, you can split legs, you can bind a pelvis with 2. So 2 triangular bandages really go an awful long way in a crisis. The other thing that really helps as well is the space blanket. Because if someone has had a big episode and they're all pale and sweaty, that sweat will cool them down and they'll get cold and then they'll get hypothermic and then that will bring its own set of problems. And again, we're out in the elements, so if you sit still for a long time you get cold. You get more so after an accident. So again, just consider having a space blanket in the kit. And again, that whole medical premise of just don't make it worse. Try and make it better. And be patient-led as well. Ask your patient, what do you need? What hurts? What can we do? Do you want to try and move this? Do you want to try it? Is it better laying still? Do you need help holding it still? Those kind of things. We'll often say to people, don't give them anything to eat or drink. As far as fluids go, rinsing and spit is probably best. If someone's had adrenaline, they've got dry mouth, rinse, spit is better. If they're diabetic, you need to feed them. Maybe they're having a hypo and that's why they crashed. Maybe they've got some medical thing going on. There are diabetic pilots in the club. So maybe actually sometimes feeding a patient is actually the most appropriate thing to do. But whatever you do for your patient, make a note of it, make a note of what you did, when you did it, and then tell the person that you give them to. Because you could give somebody pain relief, you can give them a couple of paracetamol if they've hurt themselves, and that'll help while they're waiting 20 minutes for the ambulance crew to turn up. Just when the ambulance crew turn up, just tell them that you gave them 2 paracetamols at 4 o'clock. So they've got a note. And at 4 o'clock their heart rate was this, their breathing rate was that, they look like this, and this is how they've changed. I think I've got changes on the next one. Yeah, things do change. So, pelvis patient. So this is the person who's gone up, had a fall, come down and broken their pelvis. The pelvis is kind of like a polo mitt, big circular bone, connects the hips in and the legs, and the spine runs into the back of it, and it's basically, it's your stable bit, it's all the big bony bits you can feel around here. Because it's a circular bone, it's kind of like a polo, you can't break one bit without breaking another bit, and when you break the 2 bits, then you can have that disassociation, and then you've got room for bleeding. You remember what I said about the cavities? You've got the head and the chest and the abdomen and the long bones. So once the pelvis starts separating, the abdominal cavity can get bigger, and you've got room for blood to flow into. So our pelvis patient, she actually had a drop off in blood pressure as time went on. They sent a helicopter, they sent an ambulance by road. As I said, we're at a tow field, so the ambulance had to come up the track, we had to send somebody to meet the ambulance, we had to show them where to come. Thankfully the club were really organised, and we'd notated the day. So they said, well, if you're sending the helicopter, we're in the middle of the bit that's on the camp. We've got this civil aviation notification procedure. So we'd actually notated the airfield, so the helicopter crew knew where we were because we're in the middle of the circle that's between Thetford and Detling. So they knew where we were. So the helicopter pilots knew where to find us. We'd sent somebody down to the road to bring the ambulance up. But in the sort of the 20 minutes of getting people in, patient had gone from being sort of quite pink, quite sweaty, quite warm, to going quite cold, quite pale, quite clammy. So again, we're able to highlight those changes. So when the medical crew come in, we can say, right, well, our biggest concern is this, because she was like this, she's now like that. We think this. I think that's probably the first thing you want to check. Yeah, after sorting out some pain relief. And again, it's good. Just because someone's okay now, that doesn't mean they're going to stay okay. So again, just being mindful of how things can change. Sometimes people can get a lot better, sometimes people can get a lot worse, but again, just be mindful of how it was and how it is, and that time scale, because that's relevant. And then the aftermath, particularly if it's big, particularly if it's messy, particularly if it's unsettling, talk about it. Don't bottle it up, don't suck it up, don't square it away, don't brush it under the carpet. Talk about it. Obviously incident reports, because there's learning to happen. But don't shy away from something that's not normal, because you need to kind of process that. In the ambulance service, we often talk about the picture that makes up who we are as being like a jigsaw. You've got the paragliding bits, and you've got the wife and kids bits, and you've got the house bits, you've got the car bits, and you've got all these things that make up this picture of you. And when you go and see something that's really unsettling, it's like somebody's kicked the table and scattered your jigsaw pieces all over the floor. You've got to pick them all up, put them back on the table, but now somebody's slipped you this extra bit and you don't know quite where it fits in this picture of you. You're always going to have this jigsaw piece, because you're never going to be able to forget this thing that you've seen, but you've got to find out where it goes, and that takes some time to process. You've got to shave off the corners, you've got to work out that it's going to fit in here. But that takes time, and that takes process, and talking with people who've shared a similar experience can really help. And again, PTSD is a real thing. if there's anything that's like fatal and somebody's died, police have to be involved, coroner has to be involved, BHPA has to be involved. There'll be an inquest. There'll be reports. People will have to go to court and account for what they did and when. That's not because they're looking to blame people, but they want to be sure that they've got all the facts. And it's more of a fact-gathering exercise than a blame apportioning exercise. But again, if there's anything that's potentially going to go bad, yeah, you might not necessarily think it at the time, but and again, yeah, smartphones now are great at documenting, like, scenes, cameras, stuff. Yeah, take a photo of the straps and the gear and the kit and the harness before the fire brigade cuts it to pieces, getting them out of the tree or whatever. Yeah, phones can be great as a record of times. You can record a voice memo. Yeah. Oh, it's, it's this time, we see this, we did that. And you can have like little voice memos as a way of helping you with recollections. When you do wind up reporting things after it, don't collaborate. Like, have everyone give their own perspective, because there is that kind of collective remembering thing that goes on. That's one of the things that Gav talks about in his podcast with Matt Warren about thinking clearly. Time of crisis, your brain will do some funny things, and you'll maybe invent stuff that wasn't there. And if you get 5 people's accounts of the same incident, they'll all vary slightly because they all saw it from a different angle, they all saw a different thing. Maybe the last turn before the grain was to the left, maybe the last turn before the grain was the right. But people will give their own version. If you corroborate your story, then you kind of cloud the picture and make things more difficult. Trying to think what else to really sort of kind of talk about with accidents that's relevant. The only thing I can think of really is just talking about specific incidents and what happened, what worked well, what didn't go so well, what would we do different if we had this again. And thankfully I've not been to sort of kind of too many. As I say, I've had 2 of my own. I had a big collapse, wound up in a sat, through a reserve, kind of hit the ground, feet, knees, hips, bounced, came in square across my shoulders and then broke T12. So where you've got the C bones and then the T bones in your spine, you've got the L bones and then you've got the sacral bit. So T12 is the last of the bits where the ribs meet the squidgy bit. So you've got your neck, ribs, squidgy bit at back. So where T12 and L1 are. So I crushed up T12. So I got.
Did he not come down vertically?
So I came in sideways and feet, knees, hips, and then bounced. Tuck and roll, and came in square across my shoulders on the second impact. So it was the bounce that did me. So I got a lot of pain. Like, very obviously, I got a lot of pain, but I could squidge my toes in my boots. And I knew I could move my fingers, and then I was worried about internal injuries. And this was back in 95, 96, something like that. And I was about 1 kilometre behind launch, so everyone had seen me like climb out. I'd lost the climb, was pushing back to the hill on bar, and then just took a big whack on bar, and I just wasn't paying attention. As the glider went forward, the tip came round, swung up through the lines and was croated. So it's like it was trying to tie itself in a bow tie. So I just had a little bit of wing that was flying, and then I was just going around in circles. So on the way down, my vision was going grey and it was starting to turn red. I was like, oh, this is what tunnel vision is. And then had to get the reserve and then got the reserve. It's like, right, got to throw this. Which way do I? I'll just out behind me because I was going that way, so the reserve went that way. I just figured it was going to be faster. So nobody saw the collapse, nobody saw the spiral, but everybody heard the bang of the reserve coming out. Because this was back in the days where you had a really tiny reserve, so it would open really quickly. Because you never expected to get high, so you'd have a mid-air at 200 feet. You wanted the reserve to stop you, dying. You could live with broken legs, but it just had to stop you dying. So the descent rate's like 7 or 8 meters a second or something like that. And these reserves were like tiny. You'd have this like little pouch that was about the size of a coffee mug, maybe 2 mugs. But yeah, these things were tiny. So anyway, but the aftermath of that one sort of pounded into the ground, realised I could move my toes and fingers, and then kind of tried to get onto sort of all fours. And I was trying to unclip myself from the harness so the wing and the reserve wouldn't inflate and drag me and then make things worse. And then that's when everyone got to me, and then I had lots and lots of hands on me, and then I was rolled over and then pretty much pinned to the floor. And everyone kept me very, very still until the ambulance crew turned up. They couldn't send the helicopter because of something or other. I think it was being used elsewhere. So they sent an ambulance crew by road, and they had to park like half a kilometre away and then bring a stretcher. There was a lot of confusion about what was needed. So they turned up and then went to get more stuff, and then there was a lot of toing and froing. And then they finally got me on this stretcher and gave me some gas. But they didn't want me moving, so they just put the mask on my face and wait for me to fall asleep, and then take the mask off, so I'd wake up, be really sure, they go, oh, you're awake, and then knock me out again with this anaesthetic gas. So it was just the most bizarre experience. But from the time of hitting the ground to arriving at the hospital was somewhere in the region of about 5.5 hours. Just from the palaver of, like, and the aftermath of this was like, well, if we'd known if the people that were dealing with me knew what the ambulance crew needed to know, then they could have saved them 2 to 3 trips. If we'd explained that the thing was in a remote location, then they might have diverted the helicopter, or they might have sent the RAF helicopter in. So, because Wales have got a couple of different helicopters they can use, because they can use the search and rescue helicopters as well from time to time. So there are a few sort of learning experiences there from like the language of what was used on the phone with the calls. And then with the second incident, this is the one in the Malverns, this is the one that was on the photo earlier, climbing out from the hill, and the drift had been from south of west, and then consistently the thermals have been from north of west as a drift, but this particular one that caused the collapse was from south of west, so the drift was different, and I exited the thermal going north and west, so I thought I was pushing upwind, and actually I went outside, and again took a big whack, got a collapse and cravat. So when the glider came back above me, the whole thing was cravating and the thing was starting to wind in. And I had an assessment of height. I was about level with the top of the hill, and winding back through the saddle. I'd gone round through 2 rotations. I thought, even if I can slow this down and get the cravat out, I'm going to wind up being low, windy, in the lee of the hill. So I'm probably better off going in under reserve. So I had a think about it before I threw the reserve. I didn't just impulsively go for the reserve. But equally, I didn't try and fight the glider all the way to the ground. I didn't try and stall it out. And this is something that some of the people who've been on civ courses do. They get so used to doing like full stalls and like, we can stall this out. And they run out of height and then wind up in the ground because they didn't realise how low they were getting. So I knew I was low and I knew I needed to throw, but I threw the reserve. And then drifted over the back of the hill, and then in the wash that came down over the back of the hill, that's where I landed under reserve. So I had the sinking air as well as the descent rate of reserve. So it's that hard, like fast impact. So I think I came in at like 8 meters a second or something like that. We had like the GPS recording for this one. But I actually wrote about the whole experience, and it's on the Flybubble blog. As far as a team pilot for Flybubble, I wrote lots of articles, and one of the things that I wrote about was my reserve throw. So if anyone's really minded to read about that, they can go through and have a little twist it up.
It's interesting what you said about coming out of the side of the thermal. Is that something that you've noticed, that it's more hard-edged if you go out of the side?
Yeah, I normally want to go out the front or the back. I wouldn't want to go out the side.
Yeah.
But it was noticeable that all the thermals were west-northwest, except for this one where I got the collapse, and it was west-southwest. And I went out in a west-northwest direction. Yeah. But it was like going over the falls.
there was just this monstrous like poof, and the glider just disappeared behind me. Like most of the glider was gone. I don't know if you guys have ever had a big frontal or at speed. There's just this swoosh, and it's like the hand of God is the only way I can describe it. Somebody's just swatted you out the sky. So when the glider came back, it was like, where is it? And it's behind me and rotating and turning away. I'm already starting to twist up. And as I came under the glider, I had a twist in the lines. I managed to untwist, slow some of the rotation, but we're still going around and we're still going down, quite significantly. But on reflection, I was flying in wave rotor. I'd flown 50k like the day before, and my confidence was like through the roof. I was like, invincible. I was macho. I was, ignorant to the signs. I had a whole bunch of hazardous attitude going on that led me into flying in this place. We turned up at this site. None of the locals were there. If you go flying and there's no one else outside. So hindsight being 2020, like all the signs were there. I had no business being in the air that day. That same day, Guy Anderson flew like 200k from the long wind, but he climbed out in a sketchy thermal, got to above the back of the hill, ran downwind, and then found the bounce in the wave. So it was clearly a wave day, and like the way that the sky had developed and changed. So if you noticed, understand and think ahead, if you've noticed the conditions and understood what was going on, thought ahead to what this might mean for being in the air. So I'm pretty convinced I thermaled up into wave rotor. So, because I don't lose a glider. I had precisely one frontal on the Amiga ever before this mishap in 2015. Never had a frontal on the Enzo, and like the biggest collapse I had on the Leopard was like maybe 50%. I just don't get wiped out on gliders, partly because I don't go flying in those conditions. I don't take it into like howling lead lines. I don't fly on like Larry days. But also I've had 30 odd years and 1,000 hours of doing this, and I've got a feel for a glider. You know when it pitches, you know when it surges. I'm not sitting there with my hands in my pockets and doing my sandwiches and hands off the brakes and not paying attention. I'm always flying. I always feel like I'm in control. So it's only when you fly to somewhere where you're out of control, you put the glider into somewhere that's a dangerous place to be, or you go flying on a day where you've got no business being in the air. It's blowing 20 miles an hour across the ground, but you don't notice because you're standing behind the trees. You're not aware of the conditions. But again, talking about the accidents afterwards and going through stuff, and again going through this with the guys that were there on the day. One of the locals turned up because he saw us flying and thought it was flyable, and then realised it wasn't, and then realised what had happened to me. Came down to help me pack and that sort of stuff. There was a lot of learning went on sort of kind of afterwards. But I mean, with the other accidents that I've been to, there's one at the dike when we had big storms coming in. So there's like towering rain clouds out front, sky's crying, gust front. As people have turned up and they're still flying. And then people are rushing to top land as the first drops of rain are falling, pulling in big ears, and the big ears is a little bit too big on the one side, and then the flying side gets stalled and collapsed, and before you know it, you've got the pilot into the cars. Those, they're almost kind of like an avoidable accident. If you'd landed sooner, if you'd noticed what was going on, if you'd landed before the storm hit, then. But there's that chain of events that leads up to having the mishap.
The other day, like that, about 10 days ago at the dike, gust front came through, rain came through, it cleared, and then another bigger one came through.
But again, no one went to quit. Quitting early. If you don't fly today, you can always fly tomorrow. Whereas if you do fly today, it puts tomorrow into question. And it's a tough thing when it's an addictive sport. Because nothing else makes you feel like flying. You know, there's literally nothing else like it. And if I could get the same buzz out of golf or fishing, you know, my life would be a lot easier.
But a lot less fun.
Yeah, but I mean, but that's the thing. Flying is the thing that does it for me. Yeah, I mean, surfing comes close, but you know, the weather for surfing is even more fickle than the weather for flying sometimes. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, most of the accidents that I see, it's like cuts, bruises, scrapes. You know, every so often somebody properly breaks something. But it's rare that you have a big nasty accident. But you know, they can and do happen. Yeah.
Phil, in the accidents that do turn out to be fatal, paragliding,
Yeah.
what is it that kills people? Do you know? Is that known? Is it internal injuries? Is it head injuries? Or
bit of a mix. So, I mean, one was electrocuted. Came in to land in a field, hit power lines. And there was some suspicion about, was it the fall and the injuries that did it, or was it the electrocution that, you know, it's the electrocution. There was one that happened out in Macedonia, prior to a comp. Free flyer collided with a comp pilot, both pilots like wound in. One was dead on the scene, broke his neck, the other one died of internal injuries. Basically bled out on the way to the hospital. So yeah, sometimes not getting to hospital soon enough. Trying to think who else has died recently. There was a paramotor pilot, got the brake line caught in the prop, so spiral. That'll be, you know, internal injuries or, you know, cervical spine fracture. There was a life-changing hang glider accident. There was a C-spine fracture. The glider hit the ground, the pilot slid forward, and the wing came down on the, you know, essentially on the nape of his neck. So he's, internal injuries are just difficult to deal with in a remote location. The kind of gold standard for dealing with trauma is to be at a definitive place of care within the hour of insult. So if the accident happens at 2 p.m, you want to be, you know, with the surgeons at 3, you know, signing your disclaimers and saying you can operate. So that's, yeah, you kind of, you want a rapid assessment, but you also want kind of an accurate assessment. I mean, there is an element where you don't want to push the panic button because, you know, it's expensive to get the helicopter out. But on the other hand, the helicopter can make the difference between life and death. So don't worry about it. I mean, in this country, it's all funded and paid for by charities. So, you know, every time you do a fun run, you know, tip a tenner in the bucket, and yeah, no money, no chopper. But don't feel bad about calling them out, because that's exactly what they're there for. And if the person you speak to on the other end of the phone doesn't think it's needed, then they won't send it. But if you tell them it's a fall from height, it's a big impact, it's a remote location, and I've got a patient that looks like this, and this, then they're almost certainly going to send it. So, and if they do send it, then obviously, you know, we've got to let everyone know. We've got the 4H blasts, the 4 dots for H. So that's the air horn signal that they use in New Haven, isn't it? If you get gliders laid out in a cross in the ground, yeah, if people are on radios, if you see lots of pilots putting big ears and trying to land, there's probably something going on. And again, if you see the helicopter approaching, or you can see stuff on the ground going on, you know, notice, understand, and think ahead. So again, there's that element there. But yeah, I mean, I'd say with almost anything that's more than just falling over on launch or landing, anything that's more than falling onto an outstretched hand, you're probably going to want the air ambulance to come out. As Robin says, I mean, it's more for the fact that it's got medical people who are used to assessing trauma on it. you might not necessarily need their skills, but you need their assessment. And if you have got somebody medical on the hill, then Colin, be aware of what everyone does for a living. Because sometimes, in a crisis, maybe you've got someone who's really squeamish and can't deal with blood. Get them to go meet the ambulance. I mean, everyone can fill a purpose. I mean, if somebody's really confident about first aid, then maybe get them to step up and ask for volunteers. If someone's a natural organiser, then get them to organise stuff. If someone's really good at the note-taking side of things, I mean, everyone will find their role and everyone will find their niche. And the things that go, the times when it goes really well is when everyone does their own job and no one's trying to do everyone else's. If you've got one person trying to do 4 jobs, that never works. If you've got 2 people trying to do the same job, that never works. But if you've got one person with 4 jobs and you've got, well, Dave's going to do this, Derek's going to do that, Bill will do this, and Fred will do that, and then we all know what's going on, and those are the jobs that work best. Everyone's got a role and can fill it. I think that's most of the things I wanted to cover. Did anyone have any questions? I think any questions is the last bit. Kind of mindful we're slightly but
wrapping up pretty soon for the urgent questions that you get away.
I mean, hopefully that was useful, insightful, entertaining a bit. Thanks for paying attention. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
If people do have questions, they can always post something on the coaching Telegram group.
I mean, the coach group where this got announced, I'm a coach for the club, so again, feel free to call me out on the hill. And if you want to call me about anything, then again, I've got the Instagram and everything's like either Phil C or philc.pg. I think the Instagram's at Phil C. The email address that I use for most of the paralleling stuff is philc.pg@gmail.com. So if anyone does have questions, if there's things that people wanted to ask but didn't want to necessarily ask in a room full of people, then again, sometimes that happens too. But again, give us a shout on the Telegram or the Instagram or the email and go through bits. As a takeaway, I'd recommend a coach course, I'd recommend a first aid course, and I'd recommend not hitting the ground.
Sounds like good advice.
But I've done it twice, it hurts. Don't do it.